Today, we're going to explore amazing ancient Egypt. And I predict that at least one thing that we explore together today will amaze you, and probably many things. We're going to begin with some geography and geology and natural history, and we'll be exploring human history and mysticism, all of this connected with amazing ancient Egypt. So while I share my screen here, prepare yourself to be amazed. As you are probably aware, Egypt is on the northern coast of Africa. And you may not be aware that part of Egypt is also in Asia. The Sinai Peninsula, which is just across from where that arrow is in Asia. Libya is to the west of Egypt, and Israel, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia are to the east. And on this map in that area that you can see Sinai there on the right, you might see the small city of Suez there. This is where the Suez Canal connects the Red Sea with the Mediterranean. And this is state-owned. The Suez Canal Authority operates the Suez Canal, and believe it or not, last year it generated $5.6 billion in revenue. So if you were wondering why everyone was so excited when that ship got stuck in the Suez Canal in July, that was why. Egypt is about 1.5 times the size of Texas and about 1.8 times the size of France. It's 1,866 miles above the equator, and it's at about the same latitude as New Orleans, Louisiana. At least Cairo is, which is in the far north. One amazing aspect of Egypt, of course, is the Nile River. And we're going to open up the chat. I invite you to share what you know about the Nile River. What's amazing to you about the Nile River? It flows from south to north, and it's the longest river in the world. Some experts say that the Amazon is longer when you consider all the tributaries, but typically the Nile is considered the longest river in the world. It is an amazing 4,132 miles long. Now, you might be used to seeing the calm Nile that we see in this image here, and animals grazing in the shallows. Well, it's not always that way. The Nile is formed by 3 principal streams, which are the Blue Nile and the Black Nile, which is also called Abara, which flow from the highlands of Ethiopia, and the White Nile, which the headstreams of which flow into Lakes Victoria and Albert. So again, this is a very long river. And these streams come together in Khartoum. Now, who knows what country Khartoum is in? Sudan, excellent. So Khartoum is in Sudan. And here we have a photo of what's now called Murchison or Kabalega Falls in Uganda. And from here, the water enters the northern end of Lake Albert. And you can see that this is an amazingly powerful river. It's not always calm like we're used to seeing the photos. And here is another image of a waterfall going through the gorge. Isn't this just beautiful? This one is on the Blue Nile. Here is a photograph from space that shows the shape of the Nile, and the ancient Egyptians knew that it had this shape of a lotus flower, which is quite amazing that they were aware of this. So again, the Nile flows from the south, which is a higher elevation, and flows to the north into the Mediterranean Sea. And here again is another image of what we often think of with the Nile River and all the life that it gives to everyone along its way. This is a Nile crocodile. And after the Aswan Dam was built, for the most part, the crocodiles are not in the part of the Nile from Aswan to the Mediterranean Sea, but they are in the lake that was created by the Aswan Dam, and they're in other parts of the Nile. Recently, we had a wonderful initiatic journey in Egypt, and our guide said that he had a special place that he wanted to take us on the Nile, and it was the nests of the crocodiles, the former nest in ancient times. And when we were going there, he was also talking about how difficult it was for the captain of the ship to navigate our small boat because of the current. And then he said, and here we're going to go swimming. So it was very interesting to consider that we were going to go swimming near the crocodile nest in water that has a very strong current. Once we got about 30 feet from shore, the current was too strong to stand in, and really only the strongest swimmers among us were able to go into the Nile. It was my first experience of swimming in the Nile, and it was quite exciting and wonderful. And we did not see a crocodile. Now, hold on here. So, hold on, let me go back a slide. So, an amazing place in Egypt is about 95 miles southwest of Cairo, and it's called the Valley of the Whales. So here we are in the middle of a desert, and there is a valley that has hundreds of fossils of whales. Here is an example. And 37 million years ago, in a prehistoric sea that is called the Tethys Sea, this 50-foot long creature with big jaws and jagged teeth was swimming in that sea. She died and she fell to the floor of the sea. And then over millions of years, sediment built up on top of her, and the sea receded. And it, through erosion then, over more millions of years, these fossils were exposed. And this image shows you where the old Tethys Sea was. You see Africa, and the outline there, where the arrow is, that's the northern coast. But the Mediterranean Sea went way over into Africa and into Egypt. And here are more of the whale fossils. They're just everywhere. This is a UNESCO heritage site because it's so important. As we all probably know, 360 million years ago, an animal that kind of looked like a salamander crawled out of the sea onto land. And then his descendants gradually improved their ability to live on land. And by 60 million years ago, mammals had developed and dominated Earth. Well, amazingly, whales made an evolutionary U-turn and went back into the ocean. In case you're wondering why mammals are in the ocean. Whales give live birth, they nurse their young. So these whales went back into the ocean. And this shows from the top to the bottom how this evolution took place. Again, this was the whales that were found in the Valley of the Whales are from about 37 million years ago. And here are their fossils. The image on the bottom right shows the animal that was on land, and then we see the whale up at the top. Eventually, their front legs became flippers, and their back legs are inside near their tail. And this probably sounds just unbelievable, but there are modern examples of animals that have done this. This is a marine iguana, still alive and roaming the earth in the Galapagos Islands, who did the same thing. They were carried there on sea currents. There was no food for them on the Galapagos. So one of them decided, I'm going in. And now these marine mammals, these lizards, these marine lizards can stay underwater for 10 minutes and can swim 40 miles. So there are modern examples of this happening as animals that are still alive, that we have other examples. And here is a skeleton of one of those whales. You can see the little legs in the back that are tucked inside the whale's body. So if you're able to go to Egypt and have a chance to go to the Valley of the Whales, it is truly amazing. And so this shows the old Tethys Sea, and on the right where the little green spot is, that's where the whales, the Valley of the Whales is. Now, another amazing natural feature of Egypt is the Sahara Desert. This is the largest hot desert in the world. And everything you see here, that's that tan color, that's the Sahara Desert. And there are two larger deserts in the world, but they're cold. It's in Antarctica and in the Arctic, but this is the largest hot desert in the world. And Sahara means desert. So now you know at least one word in Arabic. Even today, Egypt is about 96% desert and only 4% of land that has water available to it. And here you can see another image, again from space, showing the Nile River and the Sahara Desert. From about 10,000 BC to 4,800 BC, there were big changes in the environment and the climate. And Neolithic people lived in communities as farmers and herders. And as the climate dried out, which was part of a natural cycle, more people moved to the Nile Valley that was still very lush. And as people began to live closer together, they began to organize their society and specialize tasks in order to function more efficiently. And then eventually, simple governments formed. This image that you see here is from your museum, the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum, and it is a knife from around 4,500 BCE. Also, between 4,500 and 3,000 BCE, technologies developed at a really fast pace, including hieroglyphs. And it's amazing to think about what a difference writing made in the world. And who thought of this? Who thought, okay, we need to start writing things down. And how can we have a way to write it so that it lasts long enough to be of use to us? So many people wonder about what inspired this advancement in technology. They developed at an extraordinary pace. Then those advancements inspired trade and competition. And this is what led to the introduction of written language and monumental architecture, huge buildings. Now, in the Rosicrucian tradition, it states that there was a pre-existing, very advanced civilization in Atlantis. And they realized that the end of their civilization was coming. So they sent envoys out to different parts of the world. And some people believe that it was these envoys who brought with them the wisdom from their previous culture. John Anthony West, who was an Egyptologist, said about the Great Pyramid, which came later in history. He said, we're finding a Portia where we should expect to see a wheelbarrow. So these are just amazing advancements in technology that happened in a relatively short period of time. Then around 3150 BCE, someone named Narmer, Narmer, and many people believe it probably, his real name was probably Menes, Menes. He was a local leader in northern Egypt, and he conquered southern Egypt, and he made it one country. And then they standardized their architecture and art and commerce. So again, this made a big impact because now they were more organized and could benefit from their more efficacious systems. And this is the Narmer palette, which is in the Cairo Museum, which tells the story of Narmer defeating the south and then unifying the two lands. And this is a ceremonial object. It's saying that this was actually the deities approved of this unification. This, of course, is the Great Pyramid, and this is an important part of early dynastic period in ancient Egypt. The capital of Egypt was in Memphis, and the royal tombs were at Abydos and Saqqara. And the Old Kingdom is often called the Pyramid Age. This was when the power of the Egyptian pharaohs was extraordinary. And the king was powerful enough to bring together a lot of people to move to Giza and create monumental structures like this one. The Great Pyramid is the oldest of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and it's the only one that's still mostly intact. Now, recently we explored ancient Egyptian mysteries, and we talked about how the Great Pyramid may have been built and some other aspects of the Great Pyramid. So we're not going to go over that again today, but I'll just briefly say a little bit about the construction of the Great Pyramid. This is where the Great Pyramid is located, on the Giza Plateau up by Cairo in the north of Egypt. And this is a view from above. The Great Pyramid has 2.3 million stones. 2.3 million stones make up the Great Pyramid. The area that it's on is 13 acres. Each of those stones weigh between 2 tons and 50 tons. And originally, the Great Pyramid was 481 feet tall. The capstone is missing now, but it's still a very tall structure, and was the largest man-made structure for 3,800 years until a cathedral was built in England in the year 1311. And these are the stones on the top of the Great Pyramid. And the Great Pyramid looks like it's 4-sided, but it's actually 8-sided. And each side is concave. And this was discovered in 1940 when a British pilot flew over it. Some people say that you can only see this 8-sided view on the spring equinox, and other people say that it's possible to see it at other times as well. It's amazing on all the factors that were considered when creating this monumental pyramid. When the pyramid was completed, the surface was covered with white casing stones made of highly polished white limestone. And you can imagine the effect this would have had. And in this reproduction here, you can see that the capstone is on the top. All of that, almost all of the polished limestone on the exterior is gone. Just imagine what that would have looked like with the sun shining on it as you prepared yourself for whatever it was you were coming to the Great Pyramid to experience. All parts of Egypt were involved in the building of the Giza area, the three big pyramids and the smaller ones there. The alignment of the stones holds celestial significance, and they were built with the mastery of the sky in mind. The people who built the Great Pyramid understood astronomy. You may be aware that H. Spencer Lewis, the founder of AMORC, wrote a book called The Symbolic Prophecy of the Great Pyramid. And here's what he says about the Great Pyramid. The thesis of this book is the presentation of the mystical side of the pyramid and the support of the contention presented in many ancient traditions that the Great Pyramid was built not as a tomb for a king who sought to aggrandize himself immediately before and long after his transition, but as a place designed entirely and used exclusively for mystical ceremonies of initiation, and incidentally or coincidentally, as a monument for the preservation of wisdom and to be everlastingly a prophet of the future. It was for the purpose of initiating individuals into the great mystery schools of Egypt that the Pyramid of Giza and its adjoining subterranean halls and passageways were built. H. Spencer Lewis said, the Great Pyramid became in one embodiment a house of sacred ceremonies, a school of great wisdom, an archive of preserved knowledge, and a monument of prophecy. So if you were designing a structure to be used for mystical initiations, what would you include? If you were designing the Great Pyramid or any structure to be used for mystical initiations, what would you include? And please post your comments in the chat. Max Guillemot, PhD, was a Rosicrucian Egyptologist who wrote a book called The Initiatory Process in Ancient Egypt. This was published by AMORC and it's available for free on rosicrucian.org. And he presents the spiritual side of ancient Egyptian practices, that initiations and these buildings, these structures built for these ceremonies were not just for the pharaoh. The pharaoh, they were for all of the initiates. And these individuals would travel to the spiritual world to manifest things in ancient Egypt. Jeremy Nadler has written a book called The Shamanic Wisdom of the Pyramid Text. And he shares the coronation text of Thutmose III and the imaginal world. And this is the place where the initiates would go, this other plane of awareness where they would go and they would attune with that plane of awareness. So the coronation text of Thutmose III says, the king transformed himself into a falcon, flew up to heaven, and there had a vision of Amun-Ra, was infused with the deity's spiritual power and assimilated into himself the wisdom of the deities. So this assimilated into himself the wisdom of the deities. these initiates were participating in mystical ceremonies that created downloads. Just like shamans that we may be familiar with today who travel to other planes of awareness, they receive downloads of wisdom that they come back and share with everyone. This is the Grand Gallery. After you walk up that chamber that I just showed there, this is the Grand Gallery that leads up to what's called the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid. This image is from H. Spencer Lewis's book. This image is also from H. Spencer Lewis's book showing the King's Chamber and how this might be used as an initiatic chamber. Nikola Tesla and many others have used the Great Pyramid as a model for generating powerful amounts of energy. Tesla specifically references the Great Pyramid and using it as a model for his design, the goal of which was to provide unlimited wireless energy that's transmitted not through wires. So another amazing aspect of ancient Egypt is the Sphinx, which is right next to the Great Pyramid. The Sphinx is commonly thought to have been built around 2500 BCE, but it may be much older. Some people speculate that it's thousands of years older because of the erosion on the Sphinx that would have occurred through water, and that this had to be before the desertification of Egypt. The image on the left is from 1856, and it shows sand piled up to the top of the chest of the Great Sphinx. And then on the right, we see the Sphinx as it is today. Some people speculate that the Sphinx may have originally been built in the shape of Anubis, the jackal-headed deity who is the guardian of the mysteries and the guardian of the afterlife. And this is a small box, an ancient artifact in your museum of Anubis. And again, he's the protector of the candidates. Anubis is the conductor and the protector of candidates as they went through their initiations in ancient Egypt. Some people suggest that there is a temple actually in the head of the Sphinx, and many more people suggest that there is a temple underneath the Sphinx. When you walk around the Sphinx, you can see some openings and there is some empty space under it. I've asked many people who are Egyptian authorities who are in a position to know whether or not there is a temple under the Great Sphinx, and all of them have said that there is not. And so I guess that mystery is still to be solved. There is a temple directly in front of the Sphinx, and you can see this when you go to the Sphinx, it's right there. And the stones from that temple and the lower part of the Sphinx's body appear to be from the same period. In the inner courtyard of this temple, there are two porches that go deeper and deeper into the temple, and they're perfectly aligned with the rising and setting sun. Now, between the paws of the Sphinx and against the chest of the Sphinx, if you go there today, there is an ancient stele or stela, whichever way you prefer to pronounce this. And it's, you can see it there in the center of the bottom of this photograph. And it is an expertly carved monument that tells the story of the pharaoh Thutmose IV, who was Akhenaten's grandfather. he was not supposed to be the pharaoh. And he was out hunting and he fell asleep under the chin of the Sphinx when it was filled with sand. And he had a dream that he recorded. And in his dream, the Sphinx appeared to this young man and told him that he would offer him the throne of Egypt if he would clear out all that sand and would liberate the Sphinx from the sand covering its body. And the man who would become Tutmosis IV did that and became the pharaoh. And I was both surprised and pleased to see a photograph standing where that stele is, looking up at the Sphinx when I entered the Grand Temple in San Jose. When you enter the Grand Temple, before you go into the temple itself, in the pronaos of the temple, there is a photograph looking up at the Sphinx. And during my initiation in Egypt many years ago, I stood in this very spot and I made a promise to serve the Rosicrucian order anytime I was asked. And I have kept that promise. I, shortly after that, was asked to serve in a local lodge. I was a lodge secretary, and I've served as the guardian and the technician and in many ritualistic positions, and was standing in that very spot thanks to really just really in thanks and deep gratitude for every way in which the Rosicrucian order has enriched my life, that I made that promise. And I'm very, very happy to be keeping that promise. Next, we're going to move farther south in Egypt to a mystical city called Amarna. In ancient times, it was called Akhetaten. And Akhenaten was a pharaoh who believed in a power that exists beyond anything we can know. And he called that power the Aten. And he believed that the sun was the only symbol powerful enough to represent the Aten. And he looked for a place in Egypt that had never been dedicated to any other deity to build the headquarters of his new religion. And he was sailing on the Nile, and he saw on the horizon this little cleft in the mountains with the sun rising up in that very spot. And this is actually a hieroglyph. The way the mountain is shaped with the sun coming up means the horizon and the Aten on the horizon. So he chose this place and he built an entire city here dedicated to this deity called the Aten. And he after his transition, and many years have gone by, the whole area was destroyed. However, these two pillars have been reconstructed. This is part of the Sun Temple. This is the view that he would have had every morning watching the sunrise at his beloved capital city of Akhetaten. So I invite you for a moment to consider, what would it be like to connect with, to worship and connect with the energy that exists beyond all existence, the energy that exists beyond the sun? How would you attune with that type of powerful, all-knowing energy? And feel free to share in the chat if you like. What would you be worshiping? So again, this is the city, Akhetaten, that the pharaoh Akhenaten built out in the desert. And this is going to lead us to our next amazing place in Egypt. We see the Nile River and are probably not aware that there is something called the Nile Canyon. And this stretched for more than 1,000 miles from the Mediterranean Sea up in the north, down past Aswan, and it is as deep as the Grand Canyon in the United States and about 100 miles longer than the Grand Canyon, but it has all filled up with sediment. This is the Nile Canyon. The Nile River is on top of that. This particular image is of the Black Canyon of the Denison. And according to Joel Duff, the deepest part of the Nile Canyon would be that deep, what we're seeing here. And here's a side view showing that it goes down as deep as the Grand Canyon and even longer. And the Tethys Sea that I mentioned earlier, it would expand and retract. There was a time when the Mediterranean was almost dry, and then it would fill again and send a lot of water into this Nile Valley. The Nile Canyon filled with sediment, then filled with water, and there were times when it would flood so much that it would back up. And this created the next place that we're going to talk about, which is Lake Moeris. So about 5.3 million years ago, the Nile Canyon became an arm of the Mediterranean Sea, and over time filled with that silt and backed up, creating Lake Moeris, which is out here in the desert, and it is a saltwater lake. And this is a photograph of Lake Moeris. Around 3000 BCE, the lake was bordered by Neolithic settlements. This is about 50 miles southwest of Cairo. Today, it's called Birket Karan, but in tradition, it's called Lake Moeris. And it was once much bigger. Now it's about 78 square miles. There was a time when it was 500 to 650 square miles. Now, in 1929, a Rosicrucian group took their initiatic journey through Egypt, and the trip's secretary, who eventually became imperator, was Ralph Lewis. Ralph Lewis created a journal of this experience. And here's what he wrote about Lake Moeris. It was here that one of the greatest masters first performed the rite of baptism. And he was referring to, here is H. Spencer Lewis on that journey and some members on the 1929 journey. They had a ritual there. So when Ralph Lewis is referring to the great masters, he's referring to the master Kutumi. So he said it was here that one of the great masters first performed the rite of baptism, and it was here that many wonderful ceremonies were held in the centuries preceding our era. There is considerable mystery regarding the lake itself, as one will discover reading accounts of it in various encyclopedias. Many of the historians of ancient times describe this lake, telling different stories about it. And we find that there is even much scientific speculation as to the origin of the water that is in the lake and the buildings which originally surrounded it. There are several ancient accounts of an island that was in the middle of the lake, upon which a great temple was built by the mystical brotherhoods, and where many wonderful miracles were performed. So here is another report of an ancient fraternity, which of course included women and men. Then again, from the trip's secretary, we proceeded to the shore of the lake, and there each of us performed the symbolic ceremony of being baptized in the waters. So I ask you now to consider and share, what is the purpose of baptism for you? What is the purpose of baptism for you? In a Rosicrucian manuscript, it states, the Essenes, a community of monotheistic mystics, first settled during the time of Akhenaten's reign on the shores of Lake Moeris in the region of the El Fayum in Upper Egypt. So we see the arrow to Amarna, which was Akhenaten's city, and then the arrow at the top is where Lake Moeris is. So this manuscript says that historians say that the Essenes appeared in Israel in the 3rd century BCE. In fact, though, this fraternity arose in Egypt during the reign of Akhenaten. It was founded at the instigation of the mystics who used to go to that city, Akhetaten, the city that at the time was the headquarters of the Great White Brotherhood. Some of these mystics signaled the desire to live a monastic life so that they could devote themselves completely to the worship of the sole deity. With the agreement of Akhenaten, they went off to settle in the area of Al Fayum in Upper Egypt on the shores of Lake Moeris. The mystics from Akhetaten settled away from the people already living beside the lake. They built some dwellings and in this way put together an independent community governed by its own laws. Their objective was to live a contemplative life in order to deepen their understanding of the divine through prayer and meditation. From this early period, there were women among their number, for they were not subjected to any sort of segregation, and in fact were held in the highest regard. And the focus for the Essenes was healing techniques. So I invite you now to think about, what would the ideal community of mystics be for you? For you, what would be the ideal community of mystics? Here is an ancient drawing of the pyramid temples at Lake Moeris. Now we're going to move to another part of Egypt. This is an image of Mount Sinai. In the Bible, Mount Sinai is a mountain where the divine spoke to Moses and gave him the 10 Commandments. It's also known as Mount Horeb, Horeb, Mount Horeb. And I mentioned before that to the east here, where the arrow is, this is the Sinai Peninsula, and this is where Mount Sinai is. When we have initiatic journeys through Egypt, we have specific ceremonies that we perform in special places. And often we will include a shorter extension either before or after the journey. And on several occasions, actually, we have journeyed to Mount Sinai. And on one of these journeys, well, first of all, you get up at 2:30 in the morning so that you can be at the top of Mount Sinai for sunrise. And it's a good climb, or you can ride a camel up. And on one occasion, when I was coming back down, instead of taking the route we took up, that everybody else typically takes, Sora Karen worked with me, and she saw an arrow that showed a different way to go back. And so we went this different way, which was the back way. And we walked over terrain like this, and I've never experienced such stillness. I noticed how quiet it was and was attentive to see, there was no sound of a breeze or a fly, or there were no animals. It was utter stillness. And on several times on this journey, walking back to the camp, my eyes just filled with tears from the profound peace that I felt in this stillness. It was such an extraordinary gift. And I invite you to think about any time in your life when you have experienced deep stillness, deep silence. And if you want to share, you may want to keep it private, but if you want to share, what were the conditions for this? What conditions are needed to have that kind of deep inner stillness? So again, this is the location of Mount Sinai. And St. Catherine's Monastery has been there. It was founded between 548 and 565 of our era. This is the oldest Christian monastery in the world that's still used for its original purpose. It is a Greek monastery, and it's right at the base of Mount Sinai. It's an active monastery. This is one of the oldest Byzantine icons, and it dates from the 6th century. This is at St. Catherine's Monastery. And it's also the oldest version of a style of art that continues to today that is called Pantocrator. And that is a Greek word that is usually translated as almighty or all-powerful. And it's derived from one of the many names of the divine in Judaism. And when you hear the term Christ Pantocrator, it's come to mean that Christ is mild but stern. He's the ruler of the universe and the all-powerful judge of humanity. And take a look at this image, and you may be amazed by what you're about to see. It's actually two images. On the left side, it shows the divine. It shows this all-powerful ruler and judge of humanity. And on the right, it shows Jesus, the man. Even today, the monastery has more than 2,000 icons dating from the 6th century to today. It also has, believe it or not, a letter from the Prophet Muhammad to the Orthodox monks of St. Catherine's that offers protection, religious freedom, and peace. So this document includes the handprint of the Prophet Muhammad. And in 626, Muhammad personally granted a charter to the monks of St. Catherine Monastery to protect the rights of Christians and other non-Muslims far and near. So not just at the monastery, but far and near, who were living in predominantly Muslim areas. Muhammad wrote, "They must not be offended or disturbed or coerced or compelled." So we're continuing to move forward in history. You probably realize that this is Alexander the Great. He was a Macedonian Greek. It was the Macedonian Greek army of Alexander the Great that occupied Egypt in the year 332 BCE. And this young man, Alexander, he was 24 years old, he declared himself pharaoh. Alexander's generals, including a man named Ptolemy, you've seen this spelled before with a P, it's Ptolemy. Ptolemy split up his empire when he died. And Ptolemy gained control of Egypt. He established a dynasty that lasted for nearly 300 years until the death of Cleopatra. She was the last of the Ptolemies. So there's the city founded by Alexander the Great. This is a statue of Cleopatra in your museum. It's one of only 7 statues of Cleopatra VII that exist in the world. This was the lighthouse at Alexandria. This was another of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It was destroyed by an earthquake. And the Library of Alexandria, that no longer exists, was part of a museum. And it was a science center. So this is where our word museum comes from. It's named for the muses that inspired people. It was dedicated to knowledge. And the Ptolemaic rulers of Egypt fostered progress and knowledge collection. They gave scholarships to scientists and philosophers and poets, enticing them to come and live in Alexandria. And then in exchange, rulers received advice on how to rule their vast empire. The library was supported by the pharaoh. They collected every book they could. Their goal was to gather all the knowledge in the world under one roof. And at the height of the Library of Alexandria, it housed 400,000 scrolls, which would be an equivalent of about 100,000 books. Then during the Roman reign, the library received much less funding, which led to a decline of research and the number of scrolls. And then in the year 270 of our era, Alexandria revolted against Rome, and this led to a counterattack and the destruction of the library. So a new library was built in Alexandria in the year 2002, and the exterior has alphabets from the various languages. And this is their rare books and manuscripts room. They have shelf space for 8 million books. And the current Library of Alexandria includes 4 museums. This is it from the exterior. It's right on the Mediterranean Sea in Alexandria. And the circular design is symbolic of the rising sun. So again, we continue to move forward in history, and this is the temple of Isis at Philae. Isis started as a secondary figure thousands of years before our era, when she was the wife of, well, she always was the wife of Osiris, but that was really her major role. But by the Roman period, Isis was worshipped as the queen of the universe, and she controlled fate itself. She was the archetypal loving mother goddess. She was the protector of the pharaoh, and she was, and so this temple was built during the reign of Ptolemy II. And the temple of Isis at Philae is way down south by Aswan. Here is an image of Isis in the shape of a sycamore tree, suckling the pharaoh Thutmose III. She took care of, she nourished the pharaohs and protected them. This beautiful image was drawn by Frater Michael Bull, and it's an image of Isis coming to a character in a book called The Golden Ass. In this book, which was written by a Roman author in the 2nd century of our era, this man accidentally turns himself into an ass through the misuse of magic. And all he has to do is eat a rose and he'll be turned back into a man. But for different reasons, he's unable to do that. And he has a dream where Isis comes to save him. And she says, "Behold, Lucius," that's the man who turned himself into an ass, "I am come. Thy weeping and prayers have moved me to succor thee. I am she that is the natural mother of all things, mistress and governess of all the elements, the initial progeny of worlds, chief of powers divine, queen of heaven, the principles of the deities, the light of the goddesses." And this is the Holy of Holies in the temple of Isis that we experienced during our initiatic journeys in Egypt. Just north of there is a healing temple that is called Kom Ombo. It was constructed from 180 to 47 BCE, and this is the temple. It's a healing temple. And in the back of this temple, there is a place you can see in the center of this image, you see some ears. And this is so that you can go to this healing temple and speak to the divine itself. The goddess is there listening for whatever it is that ails you. They also have carved in the ancient walls instruments that were used in medicine in ancient Egypt. You can see a scalpel and tweezers. In your museum, in the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum, we have some of those ancient medical instruments, including a scalpel. Here are some of those. Oops, here are some of those items. Also, carved on the walls are prescriptions for what to do if a certain ailment occurs. And for example, this states that if you get a cut, you can take some manure and put honey on it and put it out in the sun for a few days and then put that on the wound. And this was creating antibiotics in ancient times. And at the beginning of all of these prescriptions, it has this image that you see in the upper left here that's called the Eye of Horus. And this is intended to tell the person, it's related to a sacred story of Horus, the falcon-headed deity, where he's in a fight with his uncle Seth, who represents chaos, and his eye is plucked out. And Horus asks for his eye to be returned. And the deity doesn't give him any eye. He gives him an eye of a deity. So now Horus sees not like we see, but sees from way above and sees beyond his individual interest. He asks for this not to help himself, but to help all of Egypt. So when you see the Eye of Horus, it's looking out for the good of all. And next to these prescriptions, you see the Eye of Horus. So it's stating, first get yourself in harmony. See what's for the better good, for the good of all, and then do these things that we describe in the prescription. And here's that, the Eye of Horus there. And then the last place that we're going to visit here is Abydos. And this was a symbolic tomb for Osiris. This is what it looks like today. And some people think that it flooded by accident, but actually this ancient temple was surrounded by a moat, and the water represented the primeval waters of creation. This was a symbolic tomb of Osiris. Candidates to the mysteries were conducted to the entrance to the sanctuary of Osiris through a corridor that's 300 feet long, covered with text from the book of the Coming Forth by Day, or the Coming Forth by Light, which we typically call the Book of the Dead, but the correct translation is the Coming Forth by Day. This is the holiest of all the cities in ancient Egypt. Everyone hoped to be buried near Abydos in order to be near the deity Osiris. And there were secret initiations that took place there. I mentioned Max Guillemot, the Rosicrucian Egyptologist. He wrote this book on the initiatory process. And it says, once you pass the final judgment, which we see here, the person on the, this is actually from the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum tomb. It's not from Abydos, but this is to show you the final judgment scene. On the left, you have the deceased person or the candidate being conducted by Anubis, the conductor of the mysteries. And the tomb owner here, his heart is being weighed against the feather of truth. And he has to pass all these tests. And it says, once you pass the final judgment, the goal of the initiation was to become true of voice. This means that the postulants express themselves with a just tone and a firm voice in their desire to experience the mysteries. And I think that's probably what all of us, what attracted many of us to the Rosicrucian order, which is a desire to experience the mysteries. So thank you all so much for participating in this exploration of amazing ancient Egypt. Is it fair to say that there was at least one thing about ancient Egypt that amazed you? I'd love to hear what some of them were. If you would put in the chat anything that you found amazing during our time together.